Hello, everyone. I'm going to give a couple minutes so everybody can get into our Zoom room, and then we will get started on our Wednesday webinar. All righty, it looks like the room is filling up. So hello, everyone, and welcome to NACEP's Wednesday webinar, a general discussion of the benefits and challenges of dual credit CTE programs in the current K-12 environment. This webinar will be recorded and posted under past webinars in the member resources section of the NACEP website. If you are a NACEP member, you can access that part of the website by clicking on member login under membership and entering your username and password, and then clicking on past webinars. My name is Miranda Rodriguez, and I am the Director of Communications and Member Services here at NACEP. I am thrilled to have Keystone Partners Pearson with us to take us through our Wednesday webinar. I'm going to hand it over to Molly as she'll get you started.
Awesome. Thank you, Miranda. Liz, if you want to go ahead and click into our next slide. Welcome, everyone. Liz, Donna, and I are really excited to be here with you all and present a discussion on some of the current things we're seeing in our CTE dual enrollment environment for K-12. Today's agenda, we'll start with some introductions, and then we'll start our panel discussion. During that discussion, we'll cover some challenges and benefits and successful models that we are currently seeing. And then after that, we will do a live Q&A. So as our discussion is going, please feel free to drop questions into our question and answer box, and then we will circle back to those during our Q&A session at the end. Please feel free to share your thoughts, your experiences. We would love to have you all participate as we get going. So first, I'm going to introduce who I think is the meat of our discussion is Miss Donna Butler, and she's here to introduce herself.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us during your busy, hopefully a little bit relaxing summer. I am Donna Butler, and I was the former college and career readiness coordinator for a community college, and I've taught K-12, higher ed, developmental ed, adult ed. I've pretty well taught it all. So what I hope to do today is to just kind of share experiences and best practices that I've learned from all those years, but also what I've learned from all of you as we kind of talk to each other and share ideas with each other. So this is definitely an inclusive webinar where I hope we can all give each other something. Thank you.
And I am Molly Kirk, and I am one of the Pearson K-12 customer success representatives. I am here today to facilitate today's discussion and add a little bit of insights from what we're seeing in terms of different states. Before joining Pearson, I was an educator myself, specializing in math and science instruction, and I've also worked with the National Geographic Education team to present at state conferences. When I'm not working, you'll find me spending a lot of time out west, here in the mountains, being outside, skiing, biking, hiking, paddleboarding, you name it, we usually do it. If I'm not outside, I'm usually catching a plane to a new destination or spending time with my two pups, Murray and Archie. So I'm excited to be here with you all and facilitate this. And again, please drop your questions or any comments and share your experiences with us in the Q&A.
Hi, and I'm Liz Meitzler-Guevara. I am another K-12 customer success representative here at Pearson. I was a high school ESOL teacher for over 10 years, and in that I had to teach quite a few subjects, really. ESOL teachers tend to be wearing many hats throughout the day, but I also worked really hard to become bilingual, become an advocate for my students, and take as many positions of leadership as I could while I was there. And part of why I'm talking today is because I actually attended a vocational high school and completed a CTE program. So I get to bring a little bit of a student perspective, even though it was a little while ago now that I finished up my program. And when I am not working, I have my 2 toddlers that I chase after. And you can usually find me shape note singing in my spare time when I have it. And yeah, I guess that's me.
Thanks, Liz. And we're going to go ahead and stop sharing our screen and kick off this discussion with Donna. And so as we kick off this discussion, we're going to start with some benefits of CTE. And we're going to start with the focus of education, which is student success. I know all of you really want your students to succeed. And so Donna, let's start with you. In your experience, how have dual enrollment CTE programs benefited students?
Well, when I think back to the college setting and CTE began to grow more and more, I saw where the curriculum became more inclusive. So it was more accessible to all students, not just to some students. And what I mean by that is, sometimes there's issues with the cost, tuition, books, transportation, especially with dual credit, if you're going to your local community college or you're going to your ATC center, and scheduling, if the college I came from, we served 14 different high schools, and some of them were relatively close and some of them weren't. So you've got to adhere to that bus schedule that, to get the students back to school on time and everything. So with that, I feel like because we became more focused on that we were able to provide more interactive learning experiences for students. And what I mean by this is that they're hands-on. You read, you listen, you apply, you learn more. And I just see the curriculum for the CTE being more inclusive for all the learning modalities that students may have. And you can see that in all kinds of curriculum that colleges and high schools are using, because now there's really rich videos and there's simulations and there's real life modules, that students can actually see someone actually in that career. So I think that it's really become very inclusive for more students, all students, I would hope. And also, I think it's benefited students because they have those job skills that they need immediately upon graduation. They are job ready. That's really important, especially when you think about the community that they live in, because they can go to work right away. And, not everybody wants to get their education and then move. A lot of people want to stay where they are. And so it's just a really good investment for the community as well as the student. And they just become those independent adults that we strive for them to be all their lives. So those are the 3 things that I think mostly that have benefited the students with our CTE programs. And I know Molly's going to hand this over to Liz next, but I love Liz's perspective as a student. I just, at the end of any discussion, Liz, that's the heart of everything we do. So I'm so glad you get to share that with us.
You're exactly right, Donna. It's a really valued perspective that I think once we become educators, it's too easy to forget our focus of education. So Liz, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Well, I think one of the other things that the CTE program really benefited for me and my classmates was having all of that licensing and all of those credentials paid for, or at least greatly reduced in price, made a huge difference. My community was mostly rural. So while we had our one part of town that was wealthier, most of us weren't. And so the idea of paying for college or even going to college was something that was just really beyond reach for a lot of my classmates. A lot of my CTE classmates also just struggled academically in general. And so having that extra motivator helped a lot of them actually stay in school. I think, of course, a few years back, it was also easier to kind of drop out of school than it used to be. Or than it is now. But I do think that a lot of my classmates actually stuck it out because they knew that if they finished their program and they graduated, they were going to be a licensed contractor, a licensed electrician, a licensed, nurse, a licensed, and it got them the idea that they weren't just going to go work a minimum wage job the second they graduated, if they weren't already, but that they actually got to move into a career. So that was a huge benefit, I think, for many of my classmates when we were there, and actually just getting into the workforce like immediately upon graduation, because they were always going to do that. Most of the people in my community were always going to go straight into the workforce, but going straight into the workforce and being qualified, like that was a big help for so many of those people and so many of their families. So that was really awesome. And the other thing I think that was a huge benefit was that there was more than a couple that got into it and went, this is not the job for me. And they would switch to a different part of the program or whatever. Some people just didn't use it all at all in the future, but most of them stayed where they were. Most of them stayed in what they had originally wanted to do. But at the same time, those who got into it and went, this is not for me, they got to have that opportunity before investing in years of higher education, before trying to get a job and maybe not really realizing what was totally involved in that job. So that I think was really invaluable and a huge benefit to a lot of those people, because nursing is a wonderful career for a lot of people, but some people get in there and have to start changing bedpans and things like that, and are like, nope, this is not for me. So same thing, some people start having to haul lumber and go, nope, I am not a carpenter. I love the idea of making furniture or framing houses, but I cannot do this every day. So I think that experience just on the student side and being able to really say, no, this is for me, or no, this is not for me, was also a huge benefit to a lot of my classmates.
That's a really good point, Liz. I think it would be nice for everyone to be able to experience that before they get into the workforce. It's a little safety net before pursuing your maybe lifelong career. With that, I know we talked about bringing success to a community. So Donna, how have you seen these programs help really flourish a community or grow a community and bring them together?
And I love bringing the community back in, because I really do think that's really important as our students, become those young adults, that they see their purpose in the community and their value. So one of the things that I see a lot of colleges doing, and especially the one I came from, is we have advisory boards for each of the trades. And on that advisory board, we will have, of course, the instructors teaching the trade, but we will also have local employers sit on that advisory board. And that has just become a really huge benefit, because employers know what they want students to come in with. We think we do as educators, we hope we do, but just like I'm thinking about, I don't know how many years, I'm not going to give my age away, but many years ago, it came to our attention that we were not providing soft skills to our students in the classroom and in the trades and in gen ed too, just, across the board. And because of the input of those advisory boards and, them saying, it would be nice if even though we think they know this, but they hear you need to show up on time, you need to not wear sandals, you're going to work in groups, just those simple things. And it's kind of like college talk. We assume when, students come into college, trade school, I'm just talking in general, that they know all the language, and they don't know all the employment skills that are needed as well. I think that's why we, I don't know, maybe it's been 8 years when we started those first year experience courses in all of our colleges. It's because we saw as educators, wait, we need to back up. They don't know this and they don't know that. And we weren't talking about academics. We were just talking a lot about, soft skills. So those advisory boards, they really help direct the curriculum. They help drive what we include in that curriculum. as we've become more computer savvy in the world, it's important that our students are that way also. Just because they know how to operate an iPhone doesn't mean they know how to send an email or get on Blackboard. There were just so many things that the advisory boards brought to our attention, and still to this day bring to our attention. And the part of, I guess what I'm trying to think of, the grow your own mindset is the best way that I can put it, is the community knows what the community needs are. So what better people to have on that board than community members? And I mean, colleges have, agreements with employers. Don't recruit our students while they're still in school, because they know how good they're going to be when they come out. They've got that OSHA training, and like the credentials that Liz was talking about. They've been earning those credentials, all the way through this. So they know the quality of student that is being produced, and they're very eager to employ those students. I can remember going on a tour of one of our factories, and we took some students, and that's a really good thing to do. And the person who was leading the tour was one of our former students. He was an employee there, and he was one of our former students. And I mean, he just had small talk with him, but then he had shop talk with him. You could tell that he was really that tradesperson that, he had wanted to go to school for. And then another former student that I can remember, he was a welding student. He actually opened his own welding company and allows the students to come for dual credit to get training in his lab. I mean, how much more can a community be invested in growing your own? That's what I mean when I say that. So I think that it's just a win-win for the student as well as the community.
I think that's a great point, Donna, especially bringing some pride back into a community, and not only encouraging people to stay around and have jobs in their own community, but just that pride of, I went through this program and now I get to show you what I'm doing now. And I'm sure that those students had some excitement giving back a little bit to the next generation of students. Liz, do you have anything to add for this?
Sure. I know that with the community, we actually did quite a bit. My nursing program, we actually went into a local state-funded nursing home. And we were learning, but we helped take care of all of those elderly people in that nursing home. And we got to go to all the different floors, the really high needs people, the people who had, who were more self-sufficient. And we got to learn a lot of those skills, but we were also helping take care of them. And I mean, they were local community members, grandparents, and family members, but that also just let us go socialize with them, help those individuals in the community, with loneliness, with interactivity. So that, I think, was really valuable to the community. But then our carpentry and electrical programs, they actually had different things set up within the community so that community members, let's say they needed a shed built or something, or a business, that needed something along those lines, they would go out and they would take on the project. And of course, being that the teachers were certified tradespeople in those specialty areas, they were making sure everything was done up to code and that everything was done correctly, and that the kids understood the code process and how everything needed to be done. But my classmates would go and frame a shed, and then maybe it needed lighting. So then the electrical would go over there and wire it up. And, they would go through all of that and they would get to have that experience. But it also meant that that community member got to have a much more cost-effective improvement to their property, because maybe they were paying for the materials, but now they weren't necessarily paying for labor in the same kind of way. Or maybe some of that funding was coming out of grant money, or, however, that I think when you have a lot of these programs, they kind of get creative with how they make sure that it gets funded so that they can actually make stuff happen. But it meant that, our community was more beautified, that companies and individuals had things that they needed. And it gave the students experience on top of it. But besides that, like, it really helped, I think, like Molly, like what you said, but the pride factor, you know, if you're driving down the street and you're like, oh, hey, my buddy made that, you know, like that is really exciting. If you can go buy something, you know what, I actually worked there for a little bit and I actually helped out all of those people, you know, like I think that that helps not only give people that sense of ownership in their community when they're just driving down the street, but also makes kind of the maturity increase too, you know, because there's more value in it. You know, when you're immediately, directly, hands-on involved in that kind of stuff, then it has more value to you. And I think that that's a big part to play there too. Maybe they would normally be spray painting the side of the shed, but if they built it, that's not going to happen, you know? And so I think that there is kind of that maturity factor that happens a lot there too. Like they're recognizing this is their community, that they are a part of it, that it's valuable. You know, they probably got to see for whoever they built that for, how excited they were about it and how valuable it was to them. It just kind of changes, I think, your perspective, especially as a young person, where we don't necessarily take in and have all that empathy for others. I think that that can be really helpful in that respect.
I think you're exactly right, Liz, and I'm sure it really helps with networking too. A lot of students in high school don't have the opportunity to network with professionals in their community. So thank you so much for bringing up those points. I know we've talked a lot about some pros, I would say, and benefits of our programs, but it would be missed if we didn't talk about some of the challenges that many of our communities face with CTE dual enrollment programs. So since the start of the pandemic, I know funding, a lot of it has increased, whether it's been CARES Act funding or other funding programs that have come from either state or national governments. But I know that tends to also be an issue. You know, Liz, how have you seen, or as a student, how did you see funding as a challenge for these programs?
Well, I mean, as a student, your perspectives is a little bit limited. But I do know, I mean, some things, even as, you know, as much as administrators and teachers like to try to keep stuff under wraps, you know, sometimes we keep an ear out. I know that things like getting and keeping those qualified teachers is a big challenge. I know that was hard in some respects because tradespeople make a lot more money than teachers do. I mean, that's just kind of a national fact, right? That's just kind of common sense to a certain extent. And so I think that that's a challenge that pretty much everybody faces, because you don't want a carpentry teacher to not have a carpentry background and not have that experience. But at the same time, an experienced carpenter is gonna make a whole lot more money out there doing carpentry than they are in the classroom. So I think that that was a big challenge in that. And I was there during a little bit of a transition time, but I think that districts kind of have to be convinced to pay for that experience. Maybe they're a first-year teacher, but they're not a first-year tradesman. And so, because they have to have a certain amount of experience to even get certified as a teacher. So, you know, especially like if you have teachers, if your district pays on a step scale, you know, yes, a year one teacher who's 21, fresh out of college is going to be paid at step 1. But a year 1 CTE teacher is maybe going to be paid at step 5 or 6 because they have 5 or 6 years of experience, even if it's not classroom experience. And so I think that getting everybody to understand that, you know, to adjust that part helps keep those teachers. But so I think that that's a big challenge, is getting people to understand and justify those competitive salaries. But another thing, and finding the money to pay them. I mean, that's the other part, you know, funding's always a challenge. And for those schools that don't have the programs yet, getting those programs up and running, figuring out the best way to do that affordably and within their budget, or even just the time consuming process of going out and finding grants. I mean, as a classroom teacher, I had to go do that, and whew, that is a lot of paperwork. So I think of those as like really big challenges, but I also know that because of some of those limitations, it affected like our classroom sizes. You don't want 30 kids in a CTE class, generally speaking, right? Because they're learning specialized skills. And sometimes there's just like a danger factor. You know, if they're welding, you don't want 30 kids in that classroom. You want a really solid small group teacher to student ratio because people can get hurt, you know? So I kind of think, I know that with my program, there was a certain number of slots and you had to try to get into the program. You had to have decent grades. You had to have, when you did your rotations through the program, you had to have good performance so that those teachers thought you would be a good fit. You had to have a lot of stuff to make sure that you got in the spot you wanted. And that's because there's only so much space, physical space in those classrooms to work. There's only so many qualified teachers that are working for the district. There's only so many resources and materials to go around. And so I think I saw that as a challenge as the student, like, because I knew, you know, there was going to be 12 of us in the nursing class and that's it. They can't expand the course because there has to be that student to teacher ratio to make sure we all learn what we need to do and we all walk out the door with the certifications and skills we need. And so that part, I think, was probably a big challenge for the administration. And as somebody who became a teacher, like, I can really imagine that that was really taxing. But I know I saw it because also, like, some of my classmates didn't get in to the programs they wanted, you know, and some of them, maybe they took their second choice, but, you know, for some of them, they just didn't get to have that opportunity. So yeah, I think those are probably the biggest challenges from the student side.
Yeah, unfortunately, funding, I wish all educators wouldn't have to worry about funding, but it seems to be that everlasting issue that arises for all of education. Donna, what kind of funding issues and challenges have you seen in your experience?
Well, and you know, everything you said, Liz, is so real and true. I thought what I might do is share some of the things that I've learned. That is a perk being at Pearson. We get to work with people all over and get to see what this state's doing and this state is doing. So I'm just going to mention some of the ways that people are being creative with that funding. Liz, because you pretty well covered all those challenges that we face. So what we're seeing a lot of are many states. The trend is definitely dual credit. I mean, it is nationwide, and how to pay for it is definitely a consideration to keep in mind. Now, the dual credit scholarships, I've seen them come in a lot of different ways. Some of them are local, some of them are state, some of them are grants. It's kind of what you said. You just look, and a lot of the schools now actually have people just dedicated to this position just to search out the funding and the scholarships available for these students. And the opportunity, like a lot of states are going to the early college model. I don't, you know, I'm just going to briefly talk about that in case you're not familiar with that. But students may start attending in their junior year in college or the trade school. So their entire junior and senior year, they are concentrating on that trade or, you know, that associate's degree, whatever they're going for. And there are all kinds of scholarships, statewide, federal, like the Pell Grant. Some states use, like the state that I'm from Kentucky. I'm sure you can tell that. They have what's KEYS money. So students get to earn money towards higher education beginning in their sophomore year. And it's based on their GPA each year, and this account grows for them. And then when they take their ACT in their junior or senior year, it can more money can be added to that account for them. And they can use this money towards, and we hope that they do. You know, this is one of those state initiatives that has just really grown and given opportunity to so many different students. They can use that for their dual credit classes, or if they go to the community college. The other thing a lot of states are doing, they're given a discounted tuition rate. And again, it's states being creative. How can we help create this, you know, dual credit atmosphere for all students, no matter, like you said, if you're rural or you're not, Liz. That shouldn't define whether or not you have that opportunity. So these state grants that are available that give reduced tuition, I've seen some states where the tuition for 2 college credit classes is $50 a semester for a high school student. Now, we know what tuition costs, so right there is a huge break. And there's also other qualifying factors. If a student maybe is on free or reduced lunches, there's another way where tuition and books can be paid for. I've seen school systems supply book vouchers for students that are taking dual credit, so they're not out, the money for books. So I think we all have kind of learned that we don't need to wait till these students get out of high school to acquire these skills, especially in the trades. And we should not make money or transportation or scheduling an obstacle for those students. We kind of need to break through those barriers and, do whatever it takes. And I think we're learning that like daily as we go through this, because different needs arise. Like, in the past 3 years, we went from face-to-face to virtual, and, we had a whole new world that we had to deal with. We had students that didn't even have the internet, and I know communities that ran buses around into neighborhoods. I mean, we had to just see what the community need was and what we could do for these students. So I think just being creative and like our listserv at NACEP, that's just a wealth of information that you can read and see what other schools and states are doing. But, don't be afraid to post your question there. I mean, you can, if you're not on the listserv, you can see I'm kind of encouraging that. I just think it's a huge resource where we get to talk to each other and learn what each other's doing. And I know funding is one of those things to be concerned about.
That's a great point, Donna. And I know sometimes, especially if you don't have experience in this world, you might feel like your CTE program is a little lonely. So definitely use that listserv to connect with other educators. You both mentioned that it's important to really help these students find these scholarship opportunities and find these enrollment opportunities. But I know that sometimes that comes down to advising. And if you're just a high school student who maybe isn't sure what you want to do, it can be very overwhelming to tackle that on by yourself. So Liz, do you have any challenges that maybe you face or you know of around proper advisement for students to help point them in the right direction and gather all these resources?
I do think my guidance counselor was pretty awesome. He was a really great guy. And he was kind of funny because he was really soft-spoken and really laid back, but he also really let us do the talking, And so I think that was a big part of that. He wanted to make sure that you really wanted and really were a good fit for whatever program you picked. I think before ever kind of going into all that, and he also was very aware of the fact that he wasn't the scholarship guy. He sent us over to the other counselor that was very much into the grants and the scholarships and had a giant filing cabinet full of all these just it was printout time. It wasn't online applications then, but it was, I think the fact that he just was aware of his own skill set and was focused on like, this is what you can do. This is how you become a master electrician. This is how you get along this. And he was really good about knowing and staying in his wheelhouse, and then sending us to other people who were better in their wheelhouses, And so I think just having really well-trained advisors who really understand the vocational CTE program was a huge part of that. Because if you're just used to regular academic advisement, it's just not the same. And I was lucky enough that my high school actually had both in the same building. So we were just split, and we got to attend academic classes with the academic teachers, and we got to, the core content classes, and then, we had our CTE stuff with our CTE teachers. But having all of those resources in the same building was just really helpful, and having a counselor who really knew the CTE part of it and knew us I think that those individual and small group counseling sessions were really vital. He would come in and talk to just our core. Like I said, I think my nursing class was like 12. He would come in and talk to like just us 12 about next steps and where to go from here and what are your options and where can you go, and what community colleges or state schools had programs that would already kind of accept us, and that would, because we weren't necessarily dual credit, but they had really strong relationships with those colleges. I think it's a little different now, but at that time they already had those relationships started, so that could be the direction that they were moving in. I know now they do count, and they count for course like certification specific classes, not just as a general elective credit. It actually counts because of the relationships with those colleges. So I do think that having those advisors and those counselors who are super on it and very well trained in CTE make a huge difference. And in that, the career exploration factor, like you were saying about the going out, about that shadowing and everything. I mean, my senior year, I spent an hour and a half in my high school building, and like that was it. And that was only every other day. We were on a block semester schedule, 90 minutes a day. That's it. First thing in the morning, I had a class, and the rest of my days, I was out in the field. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was out there with large animal vet for 3 to 4 blocks a day, depending on the day in my schedule, because we worked out both shadowing and internships along with the actual field time. And since it was veterinarian, I was nursing, the medical thing transferred over. So I got lucky in that respect, but it let me be out there. It let me be in on medical procedures and observe surgeries and get hands-on for a lot of those treatments of animals that, help me figure out, do I really want to do that or not? And what's it really like to actually be out there in the field? And if I hadn't liked it, I mean, it would have been a really great way, to convince me out of it, kind of a thing. But I mean, as far as just advising and counseling and getting kids to go into their ideally future careers, like I think it was an amazing tool. I mean, I loved it. First of all, I didn't have to sit there in classes all day. I could actually be out there doing stuff. But I just thought that it was so great that I got this hands-on experience, because vet school is super competitive. I wanted to be able to walk in the door saying, look, I have hands-on experience. I already have a medical certification and license. I wanted to have that backing. And even though it wasn't like a CTE field, it gave me that one up for other people when applying. And so that was kind of my thing, like for me and what my goals were. It was an awesome match, and it really helped me get into the path that I had wanted. Gen Chem 2 and biochemistry, not so much at the college level.
Well, I'm sure
that part was good.
I'm sure you weren't the only one feeling that way, maybe about some of those classes, but I know that I'm sure your counselor would be really excited to hear that it was a positive experience for you with advising. Really, and I'm sure that that's really what everyone strives for. Donna, I know before we move into some successful models, do you have anything to share on the advisement piece, or maybe any tips that might make this challenge turn into a benefit for the programs?
I think I would just like to show where we've been and where we are. I think we've come a long way with advising, and I want to give kudos to everybody that you're out there and you're doing that. It seems like the focus now in advising begins in elementary school. That is absolutely awesome. They have things like Parent Day where you come in and you talk about what you do. That's career exploration right there. And then they get to middle school and they'll have like Career Day. Well, people from different careers will come up and set up tables in the gym, and the middle schoolers themselves get to come through and talk and ask questions and, just kind of entertain the idea of different careers. And then our high schools have done an incredible job with having dedicated career counseling, whether it be for the trades or gen ed. And, they're doing inventory assessments on students. They're asking them questions like, what are you interested in? Why are you interested in this? Is somebody in your family doing this? So I just want to just give kudos to all the people, elementary all the way up. I think you're doing a wonderful job on advising, and I think that's what's making the difference for our students.
I think that continuity between all grade levels is huge to really promote the success of these programs. So kudos to all of you. If you are out there doing the legwork for this, your students appreciate it for sure. Our last talking point today before we get into some live Q&A is we want to talk about some successful models. And I know that Liz and Donna both have very different experiences. And so Liz, you've mentioned some of the benefits and challenges that you saw as a student, but could you give us more background and more knowledge on the model that you have used for your CTE experience?
Yeah, well, with my CTE experience, I mean, we had that exploratory phase. I mean, I think that's like the number one thing. You think you're going in for one thing and maybe you really like something else. I mean, my number one was nursing because I wanted to be a veterinarian. My number two was machine shop. I actually enjoyed that almost as much, if not more, than nursing because I liked animals. I didn't like people. But I mean, that was my number two. If I hadn't gotten my space in the medical, I would have gone to machine shop and I could have gone to a whole different career field, really. So that I think is a really huge proponent of that successful model they have. I got lucky because my program is just older and really well established and really well set. But I also know that now the administrators, I mean, they are constantly looking for grants and different funding, whether it be state level, national level, individual companies. I was talking to one of the administrators not long ago, and I know they found some company that like will actually, they're on a wait list, but they'll actually get like the whole setup to train kids on how to install solar panels. I mean, there's like stuff like that, it's a Google search and it takes time, but if you do it, like you can actually find those resources. So I know that having administrators who take the time, maybe they don't have the time, but they take the time to do a lot of that and make sure that they have those options for the students. That was a huge factor in that model being successful, because it also meant that it kept it low cost for us. I think even today, the only program that really has a fee is the nursing program, and that's just for one of the certifications, and it's like $90. So for $90, you can graduate with like 3 different kinds of, you can graduate. I got a home health aide and a certified nursing assistant, a CNA, before I left, as well as like the Red Cross, first aid and all of those things. So we didn't do OSHA back then, but current day they do. So, you walk out the door with all of those things already under your belt, and the most you've had to come up with is $90. Most families, even if they're super strapped, can come up with $90 to make sure that, and especially by then, most of us were already working. So we could have come up with $90 ourselves, making however much an hour as a nurse,
I feel like, Liz, this program that you've had experience with, maybe people need to reach out and find other programs like yours, because it sounds like they would be a great asset to maybe somebody that's just getting started or just building their program. So like Donna said earlier, collaborating with other educators on that mail list is a great way to maybe find some of those. And then Donna, I know yours was more higher ed. What were some of your experiences with your successful model?
Well, I think everything you've said, Molly, and Liz has shared, that we all can agree. There's no right or wrong way for a program. I think you have to work with where you're at, your community needs, your students, your budget. But it seems like, and this is just to kind of summarize it, it's if a program enables educators to empower students with knowledge to become independent adults, then it's successful. So, those of you listening, don't think it has to fit in a box. we're just sharing our experience. And like Liz, your perspective as a student, that is something we all hope we listen to and hear our students and see what we need to do to help them be more successful. But I think just by taking a look at, your surroundings, your community, your students, your availability of instructors, all that, and then having that student at the heart of your program, I think that is a successful model.
I love it. Thank you both for sharing so much. I know we're going to open it up here for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you would like us to talk about, get answered while we're on here, or if you have something that you maybe want to just drop and we can talk about more, please do so in the Q&A. In the meantime, I selfishly love to hear more of the benefits and successes than I do challenges. So Donna, maybe do you have a success story that you want to share in all of your years of experience that you could kind of enlighten us with, please?
I do. I have several, but I'm going to go with this one. I was at the grocery store, and so I'm going to keep it together here. I was at the grocery store and I ran into this student, and I knew this student because I had been to the ATC center in his rural community, and we just hit it off, and he remembered me and I remembered him. And so I said, "Are you getting ready to graduate?" And he goes, I am in May. And I said, "That's great. Have you filled out your paperwork and everything for the college?" Because I was, associated with the college. And he goes, "Oh, no, I can't do that. I can't go to college." And I said, "Well, you're not going to," he was in welding. I said, "You're not going to continue in welding?" And he goes, "No, I learned some though. I'm really glad I did that," because he had taken it, in his junior and senior year, not as dual credit though. So we, of course I had to completely monopolize the conversation and talk about, financial aid and, all this stuff. And so finally I said, "Why don't we just meet at the college and I'll introduce you to some of my folks." So he did. And I took him into financial aid, and, I didn't stay there with him, but they told him what he needed to do. And then I said, "You know what, let's go look at the welding lab here so you can see, what is in, your future." And he said, "Okay." So we went over there. It was like Christmas. And this is a big, burly, wonderful, just country bumpkin kid, I call him. Because it was a modern, up-to-date lab, you can only imagine. In fact, the building had only been built a year, so everything in there was just top-notch. And I handed him off to the welding instructor, and the welding instructor looked at me and kind of winked at me, and he said, "I've got this." And so I left. Well, he enrolled, he graduated with that welding, he got a job and stayed in the community, got married, bought a little house, has a little baby, and he is now an assistant foreman at the welding lab. So I have goosebumps, sorry. It's all about that. And I know everyone listening, that's why we're here. So don't forget all these other things you have to jump through. We're sorry, but the heart is in you. I know it is. So thank you for letting me share.
I know we all love success stories from education, especially when times get tough, or maybe we're wishing summer lasted a little longer and we weren't prepared really to go back to school yet in the fall here. Liz, I know that you had shared that you were pre-vet and had a lot of interest in being a large animal vet. But here we are working together at Pearson. So I know that you're not a vet. So I would love to know kind of your experience. Do you regret spending your time in your CTE program, or are you thankful for that time so that maybe you didn't spend some extra years chasing after that experience that you were given? Could you enlighten us a little more on your pathway to where you are now?
Sure. Well, yeah, like I said, college, university level, actually in Kentucky, I went to Kentucky, biochem and chemistry were just not my friends. That level of math, no, I was always a humanities person. I just didn't realize it. But I do not regret it. I do not regret it at all. First of all, anytime there is a quick repair around my house, I do not have to call a handyman. I can do minor electrical repairs. I can do some quick basic carpentry. I can do all kinds of things. And whenever one of my kids gets hurt or we have issues with doctors, I can follow the conversation. I know what to do if somebody gets hurt. I know when to panic or not. I know how to respond. And like I said, if we have those conversations, I know what they're talking about, all of that kind of medicalese I can follow pretty well because I had to learn it, even just in basic nursing stuff. But no, I think honestly, I'm still a big proponent. And the downside of the student perspective, Donna, is that when I became a teacher, because my student population were newcomers to the country, they already were tradespeople. Most of my students came in, they were already working full-time as welders, as framers, as you name it, they did it, mechanics. They already were CTE kids, but my school didn't have a CTE program. So they weren't getting certified. They weren't getting licensed. And on the student side, I'm like, just make a program. Why don't you just do this? Obviously, there's a lot that goes into building a program. Funding, space, resources, yes. But so much of me was like, yeah, but yeah, but they're just learning English. But they're pro welders who've been doing this for 5 years, and they would breeze through that program. It would increase our graduation and retention rates and increase your overall funding. So just do it. And so the downside of having gone through a program like that was really helpful and was really successful, or still is that it made me really frustrated when everyone else wasn't just like jumping on that bandwagon, or we're seeing the hurdles and weren't seeing the benefits. Because for me, especially dealing with the population I was dealing with, who already had the skills, they just didn't have the paperwork to go along with it. I was like, but think about how much further ahead these kids are going to be, how much it's going to benefit their families, how much it is going to help them move out of that free and reduced lunch population and into, a self-sustaining, like, better situation. And that'll help the community. I mean, I seriously, I went off in a few of those administrative meetings, but I think that is actually what makes me a really huge proponent. It's not just that I have those skill sets and that I've seen my classmates reach and achieve things that I am sure they otherwise would not have. I think a lot of my class would have dropped out if they didn't have the tech program. But I continue to be a proponent because of the kids that I saw the potential for that didn't get to have it. And so now I'm like, no, more schools need it. It needs to be something that more people have access to, because it's just so beneficial, I think. And I think it just helps everybody.
You're so right that everyone should have access to it. It would be an amazing opportunity that if every school in our country had access to these dual enrollment CTE programs. And with that, Donna, what would be your advice to maybe a school that's just building a relationship with either a local community college or partnering with a college for one of these dual enrollment programs? What advice would you give them if they're just getting started building that relationship, kind of working through the nuts and bolts of building the program?
I think communication is the key, and just embracing each other where you are. You bring something, to the table, and they bring something to the table. And, just like when I was talking about the advisory boards, years ago, we would have thought we would only have, professors on those kind of boards. And the tradespeople and the employers both brings such a value that instructors or educators might not even have thought about. So I just think trying to bring all those players together from the community, and talking and listening, and then of course knowing what your community needs, the needs of the community, is really important. I think that would probably be my advice.
Great points. And Liz, I know earlier you had mentioned some salary differences maybe between general education teachers and some of our trades teachers. Could you explain a little bit more on how your school was able to get some of those teachers to even come in and teach instead of just wanting to earn more money outside of the education profession?
Sure. Well, and again, I mean, some of this I know because I've caught up and tried to keep in touch with, my old community, even though I don't live there anymore. But I think that there has been, and I think what's important is having an administration that actually they need to be educated on what you're paying for. Like I said, you have someone who's fresh out of college, 22, has no experience. Yes, they start at the bottom rung. But even though a vocational teacher is maybe a first-year teacher, they are walking in with years of valuable experience, and they are walking in at a different level than somebody who's fresh out of undergrad. And they both have very valuable skill sets, and they both have their own set of knowledge, but that level of experience is what bumps them up. And so even though it's their first year teaching, I think that getting people to kind of wrap their minds around that experience as being value. I mean, we value experience, right? The longer you're a teacher, the higher up on the scale you tend to be. We value experience. So valuing that experience outside of the classroom, I think, is a mindset that has to happen for a district to buy into those higher salaries, but also really looking at what exactly the cost difference is. And then, like I said before, looking for those funding opportunities. Where are those grants? I mean, they're out there. So there's companies that'll help pay. I mean, I know we had some local factories that would pay the kids for their time there, and would help with that respect, and like Donna said, once you get the community buy-in, heck, maybe a local company upgrades their machinery and they donate their old machines to your program. And it's not that their old machines don't work, they're just upgrading. Well, that's perfectly fine to get kids at least started in their training. So, there's a lot of those things that I think once you kind of get your mind into that mindset of like, okay, so there's an offset here. How do we fill that gap? But a lot of my teachers used to do side jobs, even though it is rare to find a teacher that works 7 to 3, most of us work much longer hours than that. They could take weekends, they could take holidays, and they weren't just making a regular side job salary. They were doing, some of them were town inspectors for things. And so then on their off hours, they could go inspect a new construction building or whatever, and make a pretty penny doing so. So even though they took a lower salary, it didn't necessarily mean they took a huge hit financially. And so I think that that's kind of the thing, finding that balance between a salary that people will actually come to because they've been called to teach, while also still giving them that opportunity to have that side income to bridge that gap. Because, if you're making over $100,000 a year and you've got to go down to $50,000 a year in order to teach, that's a pretty hard hit to take. So, you're making half your salary right there. And so you've got to find a happy middle, and it's not easy, but that's what really needs to happen, I think, in order to get and keep those teachers.
You make some really good points. I think everyone in their job wants to feel valued, and part of that is salary. And so it's important to acknowledge the experience that the vocational teachers bring that's outside of teaching that maybe general educators wouldn't have. We do have one quick question. I know we're approaching the top of the hour here. So Donna, this one's for you, and then we'll wrap it up quickly. But based on your background summary, can you tell our viewers more about your focus on developmental writing, reading, English, and college readiness? And are these courses offered with dual credit in mind or more for CTE?
Well, then that depends on the state, it's per state, what the requirements are. So what we tried to do was incorporate that curriculum into the credit bearing class. So they did get the dual credit for it. But, a person that may be going into a trades, they really need the emphasis on technical writing more so than on research writing. So what we're seeing, like I said, at Pearson, I work with, all different states. I see states incorporating those kinds of classes and curriculum into the trades, and it still is a credit-bearing class, but it's different. It's more oriented towards their trade and like their math classes as well. So I do see that the developmental part being incorporated into the curriculum for the CTE students, and it being much more focused and applicable to what they're going to do.
Thank you so much. And with that, we want to thank you for attending. We are at the top of the hour, so we are going to sign off here, but we really appreciate you spending your hour with us as we discuss kind of our benefits that we have seen and challenges that we have seen for the dual enrollment CTE K12 programs.
Yes, and thank you to Molly, Liz, and Donna for sharing. I thought this conversation was wonderful, and I know our members are going to be rewatching this to, get your intake and your perspective. As a reminder, this session and all of our webinars are always available for members under our member resources, and we hope to see you at our 2022 National Conference, which will be November 6th through the 8th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you have a question that you think of when we hang up here or you're not able, you can always reach out to me and I will get you in touch with Donna, Liz, or Molly. And again, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.